Hey folks, welcome to the Unity 2020 Campfire. I have the distinct honor of introducing Justin Amash, Libertarian representative from Michigan's 3rd Congressional District. Representative Amash, welcome to the Campfire.
Hey, Bret. Thanks for having me on.
Sure, glad you could make it. I am, as our tradition has become, going to light a couple of candles just to augment the theme of Campfire. And the reason we do this is that for millennia, human beings have gathered around campfires, and when times were good, they have celebrated, they have sung and danced, and when times weren't so good, they have talked about what is wrong and what might be done about it. And so this is why we have adopted the metaphor of campfire, and I think it just improves things a little bit to have a bit of fire in the frame here. Whoops, this one's gone out. So I think the first order of business is to give people who may not be familiar with your story a little bit of an orientation. So you were not elected as a libertarian. Am I correct about that?
That's right, yeah.
So do you want to tell us how you came to the House and then ended up in the Libertarian Party?
Well, I mean, it's a long story, but I came to the House as a Republican and entered during that Tea Party wave, as they call it, during 2010. So I started in 2011. And I was a libertarian philosophically back then as well. I mean, it's not like my philosophy has changed. My political philosophy is the same. But at the time, I thought being a part of one of the two parties was the way to go. The two parties seemed to dominate everything, and it seemed to be the way to participate in politics. You know, you join the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And I had been a Republican throughout most of my life, my adult life at least. And so when I ran for office, I ran as a Republican, and Republicans were really into what I was running on. Limited government, fiscal restraint, individual liberty, personal responsibility, protecting rights. And so on issue after issue, they were with me. And I'd say about 4 or 5 years ago, I saw the Republican Party start to change. Maybe about 5 years ago, it became a little more populist and nationalistic. And I could see the writing on the wall in terms of being a Republican. I'd been talking to my friends for the past several years about leaving the party and maybe running as an independent or being a libertarian. And finally, the Trump era was like the last straw for me, where I couldn't really call myself a Republican anymore. I didn't agree enough, not just with Trump. You know, Trump is one person, but the party surrounding him had changed, and it wasn't the party I remember. And it was no longer a party that cared about the things I cared about largely. I think there are still people in the party who care about those things, but the core, the base of the party is not there anymore.
Well, interesting. You know, you ran down a list of beliefs or values that you hold, and I would say, you know, in every single case, they are values that I also hold, even though I'm about as far from a libertarian as you can get. I'm a progressive, and I would say a radical. But these are beliefs that I believe every American who understands how the nation functions, where the real magic of our system comes from, that we should all resonate with. And the place where I would imagine you and I probably part ways is with respect to how intensely to push each of these things. So the last one on your list was the protection of rights. And in this case, I believe probably we're in very close alignment that rights simply need to be protected at virtually any cost. But with respect to the others, it's a question, I would say, of balance between values. And so to the extent that we see the same things as desirable and wish to see them preserved, I think there's a deep message here. And in fact, probably it's why you and I are sharing this screen together. The idea of unity, the thing that has brought this movement together, is a belief in something above partisan politics. And your story reflects that, I think, quite well. So at some level, what I'd like us to focus on is the question of what we do once we discover that there is a patriotic obligation above our ideology, and that it calls us to join with others with whom we may not see eye to eye. How do we make that happen?
Well, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to get other people, for example, in Congress, to change the way they operate. And you mentioned being a progressive. I think there's actually a lot of alignment between many progressive principles and many principles that libertarians hold. I think a lot of the goals are the same. Sometimes the way we're trying to reach those goals is different. I come to libertarianism as basically a classical liberal. And that's how I view myself. And I care a lot about the process of government. I care about how the government operates as much as I care about the substance of government. What is the government doing substantively? And what we've lost really as a country is that concern for the process. When you look at the Constitution, for example, it's very much a process document. It tells us the process we need to follow in order to operate in a way that provides the maximum level of happiness for people. It's not a perfect document, but it's a very good document, and it's been improved over the years. It's better today than it was in past years and in past centuries. So we have improved the document, and it's largely a process document, but we've forgotten that as a country. We're so concerned about getting the substantive outcome we want that we are turning to strong men, in a sense, whether it's Donald Trump or even Nancy Pelosi as a Speaker of the House, or it might be Paul Ryan or John Boehner or Mitch McConnell. We're turning to people to give us what we want, rather than having a system, a process where we debate things and come to outcomes that are discovered through the democratic process. And that's really what we're missing. I often talk about how Congress needs to return to being a place where you discover the outcomes, where the outcomes aren't dictated, they're discovered. You go to the House floor, you present some ideas, and you find out what the representatives of the people think. Where does the will of the people lie? And it's not always going to be exactly what people at home want, but it's a very good system if you follow it. And every 2 years, people at home have a chance to boot out everyone that they don't like. So if you actually just open it up, let us vote, let us share our ideas, spread our ideas, we'll get better outcomes for everyone. I'm willing to give up on some of my substantive outcomes just to have a system that works for the people.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, I love the way you're presenting this. Some of it dovetails very closely with my own philosophy, which says that we are actually fools to think we know how to blueprint a better system, and that what we have to do is navigate our way to it, or the other analogy I like is prototype our way to it. But of course, the idea that the Constitution is a process document, which I agree, that's an excellent description of it, that requires that an environment hospitable to that process exists. And the thing that is so troubling to so many, and I think is really the core observation that has brought people to the unity movement, is that the polarization that has arisen out of this ruthless political structure managed by the duopoly is preventing that process from working, because largely the things that look like discussions unfolding on the House floor, for example, aren't real discussions. They're theater that arises out of people having calculated what they need to say into a camera and acting it out, and people aren't listening to each other because it's a foregone conclusion which way they're supposed to vote based on how their very well-resourced actual constituents have paid them to.
Well, I mean, describing it as a theater is exactly right. I mean, I sometimes look back after a year in Congress. Each year I look back and I think about, what did we accomplish as a Congress? What is it that this Congress produced for the American people. And mostly it produced entertainment. Mostly, you can look back at any year, and mostly the product was entertainment. The big pieces of legislation that go through are kind of preordained. You have Pelosi and McConnell and the president, and they get together and they sort of figure out things, and it's basically status quo. Whatever we had before, it's kind of that thing plus a couple tweaks. You rarely get any kind of major changes that will actually improve people's lives. It's basically just running in this sort of incremental, deterioration where it's incrementalism is not bad if you're improving things, if you're incrementally improving things. But what happens is each year they actually infringe on our rights a little more. They spend a little more money in a foolish way. They do things to hurt people in a new way and pretend like they're helping them. They concentrate power more in one part of government or another. And whether you're progressive or libertarian or conservative, concentration of power is a dangerous thing. I don't think that. I think too often, because libertarians and even conservatives are associated with this idea of limiting government. I think, unfortunately, a lot of Democrats and progressives then say, "Oh, well, we don't want limited government. We don't want." But actually, I don't think that's a good reaction. I think that's not a healthy reaction to say we don't want limited government. You may have different perceptions of how it should be limited, but it's important that we have a government that doesn't concentrate power. And right now, power is concentrated in a few people. It's in a few people at the top. They decide everything, and that is not good for anyone, no matter what part of the political spectrum you're on.
A few people and a few organizations.
And a few organizations, that is the most important thing we need to address. The substantive stuff, whether we have libertarian outcomes or conservative outcomes or progressive outcomes, that should be worked out through the democratic process. That should be worked out whether it's through voting or like people voting at home or people voting on the House floor or in the Senate. We work that out through the democratic process. That shouldn't be dictated. What we really need to come together on as a country, what we need to unite on, is a common understanding of what are the rules we're going to follow, what is the system we're going to follow, and how can we make it a system that is reflective of people at home, that represents people at home as effectively as possible. And right now, we just don't have that.
Yeah, we really don't. What we have is a duopoly that has a stranglehold on power and succeeds electoral cycle after electoral cycle by virtue of freezing out anything that could challenge it. And let me ask you this question, which I'm pretty sure I know the answer to. If you had run in your district as a libertarian, would you have won?
I think it was about 50-50. And we polled the district. We were getting about thirds in most of the polls. So you had about a third going our way, a third going to the Democrat, and a third going to the Republican. It was definitely a winnable district. But I'm at the point in my life where I'm not sure that coming back to Congress for another term is the most effective way to impact the system. When I go there, mostly I end up spinning my wheels just like everyone else because we don't have any power anymore. We used to, even under John Boehner, which is not that long ago, we had more power than we have now. So, and this is not just an indictment of Nancy Pelosi. Paul Ryan was the same way. These speakers have totally closed down the process. We don't have any say. For people at home who think that we have a say, we do not have a say anymore. And when we don't have a say as your representatives, you don't have a say. And that's important to understand. There are a few people running the entire system, and most members of Congress are unfortunately content with this. They're not upset about it like I'm upset about it, or like a few other people are upset about it, because the system works for them. They get to be Republicans or Democrats, and as long as they do what their leadership team tells them, they will get money at election time. They will be praised. Anything they did wrong will be swept under the rug. anything that is even a minor accomplishment will be treated like they changed the world, and they will win re-election. And they have no incentive to challenge this system because they're living large. You know, they're making salaries in Congress of $175,000 a year, but actually they're living like they're making $500,000 a year because they're going on all these codels. They're getting taken out to dinner every night. They're getting all sorts of free accommodations and other things. They are living large and they're liking it. So why would they want to challenge the system? They don't. So the only way we're going to break the system is people at home uniting and understanding what is going on. And for me, coming back to Congress and being another person spinning his wheels was not going to get the job done. I think I need to take it to the people in a more forceful way. And I don't, I haven't worked out completely what that is yet. How am I going to accomplish that? But that's where I want to focus my energy.
Well, I have a model I want to talk to you about in a second here. But before I do, I have to tell you, this is very odd. There are 3 parties represented in Congress at the moment. Am I correct about this? We've got Democrats, Republicans,
that's right, yeah.
And you are the sole representative of the Libertarian Party.
Yeah.
I have had a member of each of those parties tell me this week almost exactly what you just said. I am not sure that the most effective use of my efforts is inside of Congress, right? What does that tell you? That you've got 3 members of Congress from 3 different parties, all of whom see this structure as so dysfunctional that even though they are capable of being elected, they're not sure it's the best use of their time. That tells you something about where we are. So I do want to answer your question about what we might do. But before I do that, I want to deploy a model that I'm almost sure of. In fact, in light of what I just told you, I'm dead sure of it. And the model is that there are 3 kinds of people inside a structure like the Congress. There are people who will do the right thing no matter what. Those people probably have a pretty hard time getting elected, but it happens. There are people who will do the expedient thing no matter what, and they don't care who's harmed. And there are people who will do the expedient thing in order to get into these positions, but would prefer a system that didn't force them to. Mm-hmm. And the question really that I have is how many of the people who inhabit this system are really, when push comes to shove, in that 3rd category, who, if they were delivered a better option, would be happy to work in a system that was much more functional. Do you have a sense of what fraction that would be?
Yeah. I mean, I tend to break it down as there are a few people and it's similar to how you've broken it down, but there are a few people at the top who control the system, who know they're doing wrong, who know that they are manipulating people. Most members of Congress, the largest portion of the members of Congress, are, I hate to call them useful idiots, but in some sense, they're there just going through the motions. They don't really have ill intentions. They're not there to, they're not thinking of themselves as people who want to be harmful to our society or harmful to our system, but they're in a sense weak and scared. And if they go against the people at the top, they know what that means to them. That means that they might be out of politics. And as far as they're concerned, they are the good people. And if they're out, they'll just be replaced by bad people is how they view it. And so they want to stick around and find a way to make it work. So I think this might be the group you're talking about, which is a sizable portion of Congress, but they're afraid to act. And money plays a part in that. You know, I think money plays a pretty sizable part of that. But also things like, you know, committee chairmanships. And there are lots of things about our system. And people want to be able to participate in the system, and they know that if they challenge the system, they won't get those things. And that's, I think, that's a sizable group. In terms of the people who are just going to be pure, principled people no matter what, that's a small group. You're talking about people you can count on your fingers.
So let's talk about what the solution might look like here, because really that's what the Unity Project is about. And, I appreciate your willingness to engage with us. The key realization, I believe, is that we are divided onto different teams. In some sense, the duopoly is divided onto different teams almost entirely for reasons of power. In order to wield power, we get these two unwieldy coalitions of incoherent policy positions grafted onto each other in order to carry the day. And, as we said earlier, the key to that structure retaining power is its ability to bar anything from leveling a meaningful challenge. And we can talk about what the particular obstacles to a meaningful challenge are. But I looked at your exploration of a run for president under the Libertarian banner earlier this year, and I saw exactly the flack that you took for even exploring the idea. And, it's so generic, you can level it at anyone who dares think of anything beyond the duopoly. But here's the thing, I hear you talk. I'm not naive. I know what libertarians believe. I know what would happen if we got down to the nitty-gritty of what we thought should take place. But I also hear in you somebody who is completely genuine in their commitment to the country, who shares the same biases I do in terms of the direction that we should go. In other words, anybody who's enthusiastic about more government hasn't understood. We want as little government as possible to do the job. And what you and I are going to differ over is what that level is. But the idea that less government is desirable should be common to all of us. Not less government than we have necessarily, but less government as compared to more government, given a certain level of effectiveness, is desirable. And I'm afraid that this conversation gets confused because in the modern era, the very process that you so eloquently describe basically has turned governance malignant. And so it's natural that people would look at malignant governance and say, yeah, I want as little of that as possible, right? That's the correct reaction to the malignancy. It is not necessarily the correct reaction to the processes of governance, but the right way to deal with that is to have an open discussion about what the right level of governance is. And I can tell that you're an honest broker who would easily have such a conversation, and that we could make great progress. So you and I find ourselves united by commitment to the country. We're both patriots, obviously, and that's a very meaningful basis on which to cooperate. And then we have disagreements over the exact best interests of the country and what they would look like if manifest in governmental power. And the real challenge to the duopoly, I think, has to come from a group of people who allow their commitment to the nation to bond them together in spite of the differences they may have over what the particular course forward is. In other words, until we displace the corrupt duopoly, we won't move forward. We'll do what the corrupt duopoly wants us to do. So I look forward to a day in which we have successfully challenged it and we can actually talk about the things over which we differ. But until we do, it's like we're on a ship that is in danger of sinking, and it would be foolish to bicker over the small stuff while the ship is in jeopardy. So,
yeah, I think you're very right. I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is something I often tell people at home when I'm doing town halls and talking to constituents. Sometimes I get people on the left, sometimes I have people on the right, and they tell me, I want this and I want that, and I want you to do X and I want you to do Y and I want you to do Z. And I say, all right, I agree with some of that and I don't agree with other things, but none of it can be done under our current system. So it doesn't matter that you want all these things because we're not able to affect that. We can't do it in the current system because the system is broken. So work with me to fix the system, and then let's have a real debate about these things. And maybe I'll disagree with you, but I want to fight for your power, your right to present your issue. I want you to be able to present that issue in the Congress so that we can have a real debate on it. And then I might actually disagree with you on that issue, and I might debate you and say, no, I don't think you're right about that. but you should have the right to present it in the Congress. All, Americans should have a representative system of government that largely reflects the will of the people. And I think that is the most important fight. All the other things, it doesn't matter how much I want libertarianism. I tell libertarians this all the time. It doesn't matter how much I want libertarianism if I can't affect it through the process. In other words, if the process is broken. So when people tell me, Justin, just forget about the process. When you have a chance to take it, you just take it. Take the thing. We can get this win on this issue, and let's just take it. Just whisper in Donald Trump's ear and have him give it to you. But what good is any of that? What good is a system where I have to whisper in the president's ear and hope he likes me in order to get my way? That's what happens in dictatorships and terrible regimes across the world, where it matters who you know in government. It matters whether you're friends with the government. It matters what your last name is, or what affiliations you had as a child. All those things matter. What your religion is, even in many countries. Those things matter in other countries, and we don't want a system like that in America. At least I don't want a system like that. I think most Americans don't want a system like that. So I think you are right that the first thing we have to fight for is an open system that works for people, that is open. It doesn't mean you get all your things, but it's an open system where we can debate things. And then we'll work out whether progressives win on this policy, or libertarians win on that policy, or conservatives win on this other policy.
Well, I got to tell you, you sound like a real adult to me. And which is rare. I don't mean that to sound the slightest bit pejorative. It's so rare to hear somebody articulate something that clearly. And if I can extend it just a little bit, I find that in every camp, there are people who dream of the day that their camp just simply wins, right? There are people who think the solution is for the Democrats to go away, and once the Republicans win, things will be glorious. And there are certainly Democrats who feel the same way, and I run into libertarians who believe the same. And the thing that's so hard to convey is actually, you know what? I know that the magic depends on the tension between different values. And the last thing I want to see is a country in which liberals do not have a force that holds them to account, because they will go about solution making, thinking they're making the place better, and they will turn it into an absolute mess. I also don't want to see conservatives, scoff at the idea of progress and prevent us from doing things that we really need to do and are overdue. And I don't want to see libertarians shrink government down to the point that it's ineffectual. Right? What I want to see is these positions battle honestly, so that as we go too far in one direction, there's somebody there who knows what we're supposed to do next. And I think it's been so long. I mean, how old are you?
I'm 40.
You're 40. All right. I'm 51. I barely remember functional governance. And it wasn't highly functional. It was already very dysfunctional. But at least there was a sense that the purpose of having governance was for the well-being of the nation. And now, we have theater, which is for the voters. And then we have behind-the-scenes conversation, which is where power is really doled out and traded. And, most of us have no insight into that process because we're outsiders, too busy watching the theater and invested in all of this nonsense. And, the irony is you can tell this is true by the number of people who've been driven out of the process, the number of people who have a vote in the most powerful country on earth. They actually have a say, and they don't exercise it because they correctly understand that their vote doesn't matter in the end because of this other process, right? So uniting those people, they would be an incredibly powerful political force if they had something to vote for, which is why the duopoly has to prevent it from existing. Right? Mm-hmm. If it can prevent it from showing up where you can vote for it, it doesn't have to fend it off on the merits. And that's really what we're fighting for, is if the duopoly has to fight on the merits, it will lose because it has no merit. Very interesting to find another person who apparently sees a very similar picture, and to find you in the Libertarian Party is refreshing. Maybe that's where I should have expected to find you.
Well, I'm trying to instill these values in the party and in government generally. You know, I know that I couldn't infuse them into the Republican Party for whatever reason. I tried. I tried very hard. I'll give you an example. And this will be maybe a surprising example to a lot of progressives. The House Freedom Caucus was started because I'm one of the founders, so I know this. It was started as a group to improve the process. It was not started as a conservative group. That was not the intention. And I know because I wrote the mission statement, and I came up with the name. People wanted to include conservative in the name. I said, no, it's not. The point is not to be a conservative group. If you look at the House Freedom Caucus mission statement, I'm no longer a member of the House Freedom Caucus, as many people listening would know. But the mission statement doesn't include the word conservative anywhere, and that's on purpose. I wrote it that way because I didn't believe that was the purpose of the Freedom Caucus. It was to open up the process. It really was genuinely an attempt to fix the system from within the Republican Party, which was the majority party at the time in the House, to try to at least address some of the top-down dysfunctionality that was going on within the Republican Party that was making Congress not function properly. And we wanted to open it up for everyone so that Democrats could offer amendments, so that Republicans could offer amendments, so that everyone could participate. It got corrupted over time, in a sense, in that it diverted away from its original mission, and became more of a Trump organization, if you will, another wing of the Trump organization. But that was the point, and so this has been a project for me for a long time, trying to move Congress in a direction that is more open, and move our government generally into a direction that's more open and allows us to debate our ideas. I want to debate you, Bret. I want to have the chance, if you were in Congress, I'd want to have the chance to just debate you. I was talking to AOC yesterday, and I said to her, we need more people in Congress who have strong ideologies. That's not a problem to have strong ideologies. And I said to her, you and I disagree on a whole bunch of things. But you know what we need? We need people like that working in an open system, so that we can go to the House floor and debate these things and put them in front of the American people and let the American people decide who's right and who's wrong, and vote us in or out based on the merits, based on what you think, rather than the system right now where we're all coddled by the leadership and protected, and all we have to do is get on our knees and swear our allegiance to one party or another. And if we do that, the rest of the stuff, they'll take care of that for us. We'll get reelected. Don't worry. We'll get you money. We'll get your reelection. In fact, we'll even give you some bills. Members of Congress don't even write a lot of the bills that are passing. They're handed to the members by leadership who want them to pass something so they can win election. And oftentimes the bills don't even do that much. It's like a study or something. So that's the system we have now, and it's broken. And we need a system that's open, where I can go to the floor and I can debate AOC, and I can debate my friends on the right as well. And let's have the outcome be the result of that debate.
So that's wonderful. There's one thing I heard you say that I want to push back on a little bit, which is you said,
sure,
let the voters decide. And ultimately, I think the voters need to decide whether those who have been elected have done a good job. But there's a concept, I think it may actually come out of Marxism, so don't hold that against it. There's a concept a student alerted me to many years ago, which resonated with me quite well, which is that there is an alternative to debate, and it is dialectic. And the purpose of dialectic is not to win. The purpose of dialectic is to discover what is true. And so there needs to be an analog for this, where you and AOC could have a discussion. You could have a conflict where you each outline perspectives, and then one of you actually says, you know what, I'm persuaded on this issue. You've got it right. And that's hard to imagine under these circumstances, because people have signed up with these gargantuan teams that wield power in their own way. But that is what should be taking place. That is the vision that is outlined in the Constitution is a body, a deliberative body, an actually deliberative body. And so I will just add, when I was a professor, I was sometimes chided for speaking in riddles. And there's a reason I did this, which was that very often a complex truth is only surfaceable if you present two things that seem to conflict that are resolved by whatever that truth is. And so one of the things my followers hear me say somewhat regularly is that I'm a radical that wants to live in a world so good that I get to be a conservative. In other words, there's a point at which you've achieved something so positive that you'd be a fool to try to improve on it, because you'll more likely ruin it. And so the whole goal of progressivism ought to be to reach a state so good that you're actually logically forced into conservatism. That's a sign of success, not failure. And in any case, wouldn't it be marvelous if we had a body that was dedicated to figuring out what was actually in the interest of the public, discovering, persuading each other. It's funny, as I hear myself say it, it's so obviously right, but it sounds so naive in some way because we've become so jaded with the politics that has taken over our system. And really, it's not even politics. It's a parasite that has captured our system and diverted it to its own ends like a rabid dog.
Yeah, and I think the use of the word persuasion there is exactly right. I've talked about that and written about that many times. There's not even an effort to persuade people anymore. That's been lost, as whether it's an art or a tool, it's been lost. It's certainly lost in Congress. There is no effort to persuade anyone. The outcomes are decided in advance, and you go into what's called a debate on a bill with each side having already decided the outcome that they want, and it's going to be yes or no, and there's not really there's no effort to convince the other side, hey, come along with us. This is a good reason why you should join us. There's no effort. There's not even an effort. Like, there are many times, I'll give you another example, where I say to the Democrats, I could get on this bill if you discuss this issue with me, and maybe we could tweak this language a little bit in this way. They're not interested. The Republicans the same way. Not interested. They could get another vote on the bill. It would be something that I think most people would agree to, and we could discuss that and debate it or offer an amendment on the floor. And they're not interested in even having that debate. They don't want to let me offer the amendment or offer the suggestion. It's just like, no, this is the bill. I'm sorry. Take it or leave it. This is the way we're doing it. And I don't understand that. I just can't understand a system where someone writes a bill and says this is the product, and then members of Congress are like, hey, if you changed it this way, I'd consider it. And then people say, no, we're just not going to even allow you to debate that or discuss it, and we're not going to allow anyone to consider that. I don't understand why. We could produce a better product. We could actually find some common ground a lot of times, and instead they want the battle because it sells well, right? It doesn't sell well to if Pelosi or McConnell go back and they say, oh, like, we get along just great, and we have disagreements and differences, but we get along great, and we worked this out, and Nancy came up with this idea, and I thought it was a good one, and so we changed the bill that way, or Mitch did this, and I like that. That never happens. That never happens in our system. And not only should it be between leaders, it should be among the entire body, right? But that never happens in our system because they want to have the fight. They want to send the email that says Nancy Pelosi is destroying our country, or Mitch McConnell is holding up progress, or whatever. They want to send those emails. They're not actually interested in working with each other at the top. And unfortunately, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of the rank and file members just fall in line because they're scared of the people at the top, the people who wield most of the power. And that's what we have to change. And I think we'll continue to discuss how to make that happen. But it's important that the American people are educated about what is going on. I think that's really important. I don't think it will change in a vacuum. It's not going to change just because you and I talked about it, or because I talked to a lot of my Republican colleagues or my Democratic colleagues. People say, "Why don't you tell your colleagues to, be responsible?" Like, well, what good is they're not going to be responsible because they're not afraid of me. They're afraid of you. They're afraid of people at home. And so until people at home are aware of what's going on, it's not going to change. And one of the best things we can do as a country is unite around creating a better system, a better process, with the understanding that then everyone will get a chance to have their say. It doesn't mean, I don't mean that you'll get your way, but you'll have a chance to be heard and to have your positions discussed and debated. That's what's really important.
That is what's really important. Now, there's a question about how much the people at home do understand.
I think unfortunately they do not really understand the system very well.
Well, they don't understand the detail of how it functions at all. Frankly, I'm not sure that I do. I know, however, that it is functioning in someone else's interest.
It's very obvious because I can talk to people. For example, I had a conversation with some senators. They don't know how the House functions, and those are U.S. senators.
That's interesting.
And if you ask me about the U.S. Senate, I don't know all the rules of the U.S. Senate and couldn't tell you all the nuances of how the Senate functions. I can tell you a lot about how the U.S. House functions. So it is not surprising that people at home are not that familiar with the process. When they watch Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, and they hear that such and such thing is happening, they believe it because they have no reason not to believe it. They don't know that what is being presented on TV is some kind of very crude summary of what's actually happening in real life. And it doesn't reflect the actual process or what's even in the legislation. The legislation will be presented on TV as though it does something, and it doesn't do that thing at all. But there's no good way right now, unfortunately, from within to get people at home to understand this and follow it, because people are busy. They have their own lives. They're busy with a lot of things. And I've tried as a congressman, and I haven't found a really effective way to reach everyone. I can reach a portion of the population, of course.
Well, I think, frankly, you're probably pressing on the wrong leverage point, because people do not, and they are not going to understand the details of the dysfunction in the Congress, for example. But what they intuit is that it is not functioning in their interest, and that it is functioning in someone else's interest. And
that's right. Yep.
That's all they really need to know, right? Because the point is, one wants to embrace that which actually has their interests at heart and has a potential to wield power in that direction. The problem is,
Bret, Bret, one thing I run into, though, oftentimes, because I'll be describing this problem and talking about the dysfunction. And one thing I frequently get from people at home is if they're on the left, they blame it on Mitch McConnell.
Right.
And if they're on the right, they blame it on Nancy Pelosi. So it is true that it's important that they just understand that there's dysfunction, but it's also problematic that they don't know what is causing the dysfunction. If you're at home and you think that the dysfunction is caused purely by Mitch McConnell, that's not what's happening. Or if you think it's caused purely by Nancy Pelosi, that's not what's actually happening here. It is caused by both of them. They both play a big role in it. But it is not exclusively one side or the other, or the House versus the Senate. There's a whole mess here, including the executive branch, the president, of course. So I think trying to get people past their biases has been the biggest challenge. That people have partisan biases, and I'm sure you experience this all the time. And every time you bring up anything where there are systemic problems, as there are in our system in Congress, they say, "Don't both sides this."
Right? Oh,
don't both sides. This is all on Mitch McConnell or all on Pelosi. Don't both sides it. And that "don't both sides it" thing is itself the problem. Like the idea that only one side is causing all the dysfunction is itself the problem that we're trying to resolve. So that's been a big challenge.
Oh, it's a huge challenge. in fact, it's funny that you mention it because we have just released an animation in the Unity movement that describes this as a process like a 3D film where you have a red lens and a blue lens, and it allows you to see two different things. And only when you open both eyes do you get the full picture of what's going on. And so what we have is the electorate neatly divided into two camps, which sees half the truth, right? They see the problem caused by the other side, but they don't see the problem caused by their side. And they don't understand, therefore, that in some sense, we have Coke and Pepsi agreed on a process to keep us debating which of them is the better flavor so that we don't discover that there are other things to drink, right? Mm-hmm. It's that process. And, our media, which you point out is describing these things, it's part of the theater, right? Mm-hmm. It's part of the theater. And it is in some sense in a partnership with the duopoly. As long as the duopoly is safe, then the fiercely divided media is safe. And so there's just this cascade of people protecting their own role in a system where they've got a pretty good deal, including, as you point out, members of Congress who have a pretty sweet deal because of all sorts of, leaks in the system that cause them to live above their incomes. And that the thing that's, I think, missing from what you've said is if you take all of the people who don't vote, right, you've got two camps there. You've got people who are apathetic, and you've got people who are disaffected. And the problem is, for those of us who are paying attention, we can't distinguish these two things. As soon as somebody has left the process, we stop focusing on them. But the disaffected are quite reachable. In fact, Unity finds that a quarter of our volunteers, these are people who are actually willing to spend their time working for Unity. A quarter of our volunteers are people who weren't planning to vote otherwise. So I find that an amazing fact, that there are people out there waiting to see something that suggests that somebody is working in their interest, and they will join forces with it, not just with a vote, but with their actual time. So that's encouraging. But I would say there are lots of other people who are voting, who are, they're kin to the disaffected. They're voting, but they're not fooled. They know, we've seen academic studies have established that the public's desire has almost no actual influence over policy. We can see that policy is actually following something else, and those of us who know a bit about the system know what it is, that there are people who are getting their interests addressed, and they use various legal forms of corruption in order to bend policy in their direction. What people understand less well is that when it is necessary to pay to get your interests served in Congress, that is because your interests are in conflict with the public. Any place where the public's interests and the corporate interests align, that will simply become policy because there's no one to oppose it. So any place that corporations are paying big bucks to have things bent in their direction, they're actually acting against the public, which is part of why our government is so dysfunctional, is that it has cryptically become the enemy of the public. And so all I'm getting at is that when you put together the fraction of people who don't vote who are disaffected and the fraction of people who do vote but know that the system is broken and hostile to them and they're just trying to wield whatever small amount of influence they have, that's a very large group of people. And they are reachable. They don't need to know the details of how the process is corrupt in order to detect that it is corrupt. And to the extent that there was, more than a handful of people standing up and saying, actually, you know what, the duopoly is the problem. You can say it's Trump. They can say it's Biden. It's the system that produced that. It's the system that thought that Trump and Biden was a reasonable situation to put voters in, when in fact it's a demonstration that the system is completely out of ideas. And
yeah, I'm with you. Like, I'm with you on that. When you put Trump versus Biden on the main stage, and that's the best that the two parties can come up with, there is a big problem. I don't think this is reflective of the brilliance of America, or our society generally. And I don't think people are happy with it, and I think people are sort of just putting up with it. They tolerate it. Most people just tolerate it. But you're right. There's a huge portion of the population that's disaffected. They unfortunately are largely not the ones engaged on Twitter or Facebook or at town halls. What you tend to get is the most politically active people being the most partisan people. And that's a thing that is also, I think, a challenge for any sort of unity movement, trying to unite people who are disaffected. How do you get them engaged? And I know you've done some work on that, but as you know, probably from your experience, it's easy to get people riled up about hating Republicans or hating Democrats, but it is more difficult to get them riled up about hating what our system has become. It's just giving them characters like McConnell or Pelosi or Trump. I think for some reason it's human nature. It's human nature to blame individuals for our problems rather than some kind of larger system that seems to them beyond their control. I run into people all the time, as I mentioned earlier, who think that if you just swapped out McConnell for Schumer, the whole system would work perfectly.
Right.
He just put Schumer in charge of the Senate, and everything works great. Or reverse, if you just put McCarthy in charge of the House, so everything will work just great. It's not true. It's not true. But how do you reach the people who are disaffected but have turned it off? Because a large portion of the population, they've just turned it off. They don't want to be involved. They're sick of this. They're sick of the two parties, and so they just turn it off. They don't turn on the TV. They don't turn on Twitter or Facebook or anything else. You're not even able to reach them effectively. So how do you get past that?
Well, in some sense, the answer is emerging, right? I don't think anyone planned it, but what we are seeing is you've got a duopoly that has a stranglehold on power. It has a central argument that comes down to the paradox of the lesser evil, the reason that you must not experiment with ideas that it does not control. And it's got a press that is dependent on access to the duopoly, so won't betray it, and complicit because they have a pretty sweet deal and they don't want to upend their own niche. But at the same moment, you have Silicon Valley having accidentally produced a landscape in which you can run a TV program out of your garage, and you can broadcast it, and people who want to tune in can. And the duopoly and its various sycophants are trying to gain control of what they have unleashed in these platforms. They're trying to shut things down. You may know Twitter shut down the Articles of Unity, the official Unity 2020 account. They've not told us why. They've not allowed us to see the evidence. They've not allowed us to rebut it.
What have they alleged?
Well, they have informally alleged, behind the scenes, they have informally alleged that we registered something like 50 accounts for the purpose of amplifying a hashtag. Now, we did broadcast a hashtag, and members of the movement did tweet it, including me. Mm-hmm. But there was no registry of accounts. That didn't happen, right? That's fiction. We were also accused of being Russian bots. Now, I can't say if there are Russian bots out there, but I can say if there are, we had nothing to do with them, right? We actually did a thorough investigation. It took us a week to look through everything that anybody associated with our movement had done to figure out if there was anything we didn't know. And it turned out there wasn't. This was fiction, and it's clearly political. It even went to the point that Twitter made it impossible to tweet a link to our website, which if you attempted to tweet that link, you got a warning that the content of the website might be harmful. And this is a movement challenging the duopoly, arguing that corruption has taken over our system and that we need to do something differently. You can dismiss that as foolish. You can say the lesser evil problem is too great to think those thoughts this year, but this is obviously patriotic and obviously true. And for a major platform to shut it down, right, to actually trigger code that doesn't allow citizens to point other citizens to a website challenging the duopoly is, it's the peek behind the curtain, right? This is being maintained by forces that have a political agenda. Twitter has access to the Democratic Party that presumably it is interested in maintaining. It doesn't want to see the Democratic Party challenged, and it will shut down citizens trying to speak in order to do it. But we haven't gone anywhere. And the fact is, a lot of people got their first taste of what these mechanisms look like seeing Twitter shut us down. So suddenly a lot of people who weren't so sure what was going on are aware, oh my goodness, there are powerful forces that don't want us talking about the corruption of the duopoly. And so in any case, my point was there are channels that have truly built themselves, are beholden to no one, and have huge audiences. And those channels are a place where these things are routinely discussed. So if we take the only metrics to be the official ones, that is to say what the networks, what cable news says, if we take, the degree to which the major parties want to acknowledge that there is even anything out there challenging them, well, then, of course, it's a loss because they've set up the rules to ensure that it would be. On the other hand, if we look at how popular the heterodox voices are that are talking about the fact that the duopoly's corruption has placed the nation in grave danger, well, there's an awful large audience for that. So I guess I'm not as hopeless as it sounds like you are, and I know you're not actually that hopeless because you walked away from your party.
I'm not hopeless. I think it is a challenge though to reach people who are not partisan. I mean, it's human nature to be biased or form like tribal associations or whatever it might be, and I think that people do that with political parties. They do it with sports teams. They do it with all sorts of things, and it is hard to overcome that with a message of, hey, we have to unite, all of us who are disaffected, who don't feel represented by this system of government. We all have to unite. I'm not saying that it's not the right thing. I'm with you on that. I think we do need to unite. I think we need to make this happen. I believe we need to work together as a people for years to come. I think that this is a many-year project to try to bring us all together to oppose this duopoly, but it's also very challenging, and that's something that we'll have to answer. Both you and I and others who are working on this will have to answer: how are we going to reach all these people? And we will reach some portion of them, but will we reach enough to overcome partisan Democrats, partisan Republicans, and the people who are keeping this system in place, which is a large network of people, as you've laid out?
Well, so I will make a prediction. We will beat them sooner than you think. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is this is a question of tipping point, right? The way that those who step outside of the system, like yourself, are dismissed as this is quixotic, right? Okay, so fine, they want to fight this battle. Maybe we even admire them, but we know they'll never be effective. But as more and more people can't stand the role that they are forced to play inside of the system and step out of it and say why they've done it, the point is it creates a model, and the tipping point is closer than we think. It doesn't take that many people to actually describe the dysfunction of the system and the danger it's putting us in before others will sign on. In fact, each tier, the courageous people step out first, and then each tier below them steps out because somebody has shown them the way, and it's not very long before the snowball grows. But the other thing, you said that it is natural for us to be tribal, and you're right. I'll say that this is true in evolutionary terms. You're speaking literally, but it's not the whole picture, because it is also natural for human beings to affiliate and to collaborate. And the irony is that cooperation evolved to increase our success in competition. So to the extent that we find China to be a formidable enemy at the moment, putting aside our differences at home is a natural instinct. Now, it's being frustrated by the duopoly, which wants us divided because that's how it remains in power. But to the extent that we recognize that actually the alliance of the duopoly that freezes out all competitors because both sides want it that way, that is placing us in grave danger, is reason that we might affiliate. It's reason that we would do exactly what we are doing on this campfire, which is recognizing that our patriotic belief in this nation is enough to unite us in the face of something that jeopardizes it, whether that something is China or the duopoly or the way the duopoly makes us vulnerable to China. It doesn't much matter. The point is that the jeopardy is real, and the natural response to that jeopardy is for us to see each other in a positive light and collaborate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just hope it's a big enough number. And I do think that there, from my experience, there are a few people in Congress who think that way, not many. And when I go out into public, if I hold a town hall or an event, there are a few people who think that way. But it's getting those people out of their homes and getting those people engaged. That's the real challenge. And I hope we can be successful.
So before we take our intermission and then move to some questions from the audience, I want to cover one last issue, and it's a delicate one. Mm-hmm. Unity came to the table quite late in this election. People, myself at the head, became quite alarmed at what was unfolding in the electoral space. And as we saw a contest between Biden and Trump shape up, leaving us no out, we decided to do something about it. And the first question was, of course, one of ballot access. And what we realized was that there was no way we were going to be able to collect the signatures necessary to gain access to the ballot in all 50 states. And that, in fact, that's the reason for the rules of ballot access. It's one of the ways that duopoly freezes out competitors. But that there was another way to the ballot, which involved partnering, since Unity is not a party, it's a movement, that we were free to partner with parties that do have ballot access, either nationally, as the Libertarians and Greens do, or regionally, as many other parties do. Now, the Libertarians have taken some offense at this. And I must say, I understand where that offense comes from. I get it. Libertarians have worked very hard. The fact that Libertarians have national ballot access is a huge triumph and the result of a tremendous amount of work on the part of very dedicated people. And I'm not asking you to speak on their behalf, but I just want to point out the following principle, which I think our movements ought to recognize together, which is that the Libertarians, as I understand them, and I have spent a fair amount of time reading the platform, etc., are motivated by two things. One of them is an ideological sense about the nature of governance and a passionate belief that minimizing governance works to the benefit of people, it liberates them. And the other thing is that they are motivated to challenge the corrupt duopoly structure, which is preventing good governance. And in trying to figure out how we defeat the duopoly, my sense is, you've correctly laid out the case that this is a difficult problem to solve, that it's very hard to get people to focus on what the actual difficulty is, and that means that this is a long-term project. But if all of the parties that understand the duopoly to be central to the dysfunction were to rally around challenging it, we would be much closer to that goal than we are if we're going to each challenge it separately. And so, again, I'm not asking you to do anything other than comment on this. But what I would say is, I think that in the case of the Libertarians who have responded to us on Twitter a bit, there's a sense that we are not like-minded, when in fact I think half of the mission that the Libertarian Party is about, we are like-minded. The recognition that the duopoly is itself a problem and the desire to get to a place where we can actually have a discussion about whether or not the Libertarians have the right answer, whether the Libertarians are right on economics, the Greens might be right on the environment. There's a lot of ways it could play out, but that until we get the duopoly back on its heels, we can't have any of those discussions, and that has to be our top priority. So anyway, I've said a great deal. I hope I haven't put you in a bad position, but
no, I've been put in many positions in my life at town halls and various other places from questions. So I think the problem right now is the late start. Starting this late in the process, I don't think it's possible to go to a political party and say, without facing a lot of pushback, hey, we'd like to use your ballot access to further this movement. And I do agree with you that libertarians share many of those values, particularly the values regarding ending the duopoly and opening up the system and allowing people to have more ability to participate in the process, contrary to how it works today. But it's a matter of starting early enough so that everyone knows the ground rules. Like if for example, a project like yours is starting 4 years out and talks to the libertarians and says, hey, we think this is a good idea, it gives everyone involved with that party a chance to say yes or no, this is something I'd like our party to be a part of. And I think that's really important. I'm new to the Libertarian Party myself. I've only been a member for the last several months, and it's a party that I'm proud to be a member of. I think that it is attempting to affect change, and I think it has a lot of potential to be a great party and a major player in our politics. But it's also, like a lot of small parties, concerned about its own brand and concerned about how it grows and develops. And I think those things are important. Libertarians have a particular philosophy and a particular brand. And so if you want to partner with them, I think the important and key thing to do is to try to partner early on. It's not the kind of thing I think you come to at the last second, at least in terms of the election, and say, hey, we're going to work with you right now on this, because they worked hard. The party worked hard, a great effort to get ballot access in 50 states plus DC. And I think it's the only third party that's been able to do something like that. So it's a fantastic effort, and it's the kind of thing that needs to keep happening for the next several years. And I do think they need to forge alliances with people to try to grow the movement. And sometimes those alliances will not be based on the substantive libertarianism, if you will, but on some procedural libertarianism, the idea that the process is broken and we want to return to a system that allows people to participate and engage and have these debates. But I don't think at this stage in the process it's the kind of thing that I'd want to tell the Libertarian Party, hey, this is the thing we should do.
Right. Now, so two things that I think are important to say. One, if I was convinced that this was just a process in motion and that 2020 wasn't a special year and that we could revisit this in 2024, it's the obvious thing to do is to build up the momentum to get there. The emergency that is created by the current presidential election was the motivation for this project. It is the reason that we spun it up so quickly, and it is the reason that we are engaged in the very impolite activity of attempting to partner with people who have fought long and hard to get ballot access in 50 states. So please understand, it's not for a lack of understanding of how much work went into it, nor for a sense of entitlement that the people who did that work should step aside. It's a question of this is an emergency, and we need to use your vehicle to break down the door to rescue the people inside the building, right? It's that kind of situation. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, and I think this has been less well understood, the advantages that would come to it, and it doesn't have to be the Libertarian Party. In fact, we didn't spell out the Libertarian Party in any specific way. The Libertarian Party reacted, but we thought about the Greens, and we have thought about the many regional parties, which makes it slightly less practical, but still doable. But from the point of view of something like the Libertarian Party, a partnership with unity stands a very strong chance of creating better access in the future, which is to say, if you get 5% of the vote, that results in federal funds in future elections. This year, they would have been worth something like $20 million. That's a substantial chunk of resource to dedicate to future electoral efforts. That's one thing. Another thing would be, the Libertarian Party is very likely to either be regarded as a footnote in this election or a spoiler, in which case, there's downsides to that. The best case being just the opportunity cost, whereas if it partnered with the unity movement, it could be regarded as heroic, as striking a real blow against the duopoly. And then the third thing is that we have shown a real commitment to ranked choice voting, and we have said that we would like to see ranked choice voting spread across the country as national policy. And ranked choice voting clearly favors the inclusion of voices like the Libertarian Party. And so, from our perspective, this was not a question of, borrowing the ballot access. It was a question of a trade that we thought actually would be viewed by libertarians, Greens, and others as potentially quite positive in the long run, even though it involves sacrifices in the immediate case. But, sacrifice is what leadership is about.
Yeah, and I think partnerships are important. I think for small parties, you have to accept that there will be partnerships that happen. Because when you are maybe just a few percent of the electorate as a party, you need to grow, you need to bring people in. And sometimes someone might come in from another movement, maybe the unity movement, maybe another movement, and they suddenly become libertarians. They decide, hey, I like what I'm seeing, and I want to be a part of this. So I think those partnerships are important. I just think the timing is not good. When it comes to whether this election's an emergency, look, I'm with you on the idea that these are two of the worst candidates you could put up, and I don't want to get into which one is worse, and then I'll get attacked by one side or the other for saying that person's the worst one, or is Trump the real emergency versus someone else. The bottom line for me is neither one of them resolves these problems that we have in our system. But these problems are going to exist again in 2024, just like they'll exist in 2022. They're going to exist in the next 2 years and the next 4 years. I think no matter who the Republicans and Democrats put up in 2024, for example, for the presidency, you're going to have the same problems still lingering until they are addressed through some kind of outside force, whether that's Libertarian Party or Unity or anyone else. So I don't view it as something that has to happen in this election cycle the same way maybe you do. I think that it's something that can be a long-term partnership. And there's also a logistical problem in that ballots are being printed right now. So I don't know how, even if you get to the point where everyone says, yeah, this is a great idea and we agree and let's partner and all that, ballots are being printed and you'd have to create some kind of strange instruction to people. Well, when you vote for these people, you're really voting for these people, and I think that stuff becomes too difficult, too challenging to be successful. I'm a person who ran an exploratory committee in April, did it for about 3 weeks, and that was much earlier than now, an earlier time, and I had a real chance at being the Libertarian Party nominee, I believe, but came to the realization about a week before the nomination that I didn't think this was the right time. I didn't think that it could be pulled off effectively. And so I withdrew. That doesn't mean that I'm giving up on the whole process or trying to change politics or whatever, but it does mean I think that there is a better opportunity to change this. And I wouldn't give up hope and say just because it doesn't work this time that it won't work next time. I think we have the chance to build coalitions that will be effective in the future.
Well, first of all, I resonate with much of what you've said. I do think we differ over the seriousness and the immediacy of the emergency that we face. Hopefully you're right. I will say for certain that no matter what happens in this electoral cycle, that the unity movement is composed of people who are committed to the idea of unity long term. And Unity 2020 is about a particular plan for this emergency scenario, but that if this scenario pans out as the two major party candidates battling it out and one of them being inaugurated in January, the need for the unity movement is all the greater, and the period of time that we have to approach the next cycle is then hopefully ample. So I do agree with you. Given more time, that's obviously a desirable approach. And in any case, that's where we find ourselves. So I'm going to suggest that we take our intermission and then we come back.
Okay.
People, there may be a button at the bottom of your screen that allows people to log into Democracy AI so they can participate with us. So for the moment, let me just say thank you, Representative Amash, for joining us. I greatly admire what you've accomplished. I appreciate your patriotism. It comes through loud and clear, and your clarity of thinking on the issues we've been discussing. And we greatly appreciate you joining us on the Campfire.
Thanks, Bret. And I appreciate being on here and talking to someone who, even though we don't agree on every ideological aspect, I think it's important that we have people who agree on trying to fix our system and make it a system that works for the American people.
Excellent. All right, folks, we'll see you in about 15 minutes. Log into Democracy AI and let us know what you want to hear from Representative Amash and me. Hey, folks. Welcome back to the Unity 2020 Campfire with Representative Justin Amash. We have arrived at the point where we engage the audience using the Democracy AI platform. Many of you have logged in. We have Elizabeth with us. Elizabeth, are you going to play the role of the disembodied voice?
I am, except not so disembodied, I think.
There you are. You're fully embodied.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Right here.
Marvelous. What they can do with technology these days.
Amazing.
All right. So how should we do this, Elizabeth?
So I can start off with the first question. And this first question is for Representative Amash. And the question is, what would it take to convince you that we are indeed in a dire emergency in this country?
Well, I think that we are in a very bad place. There's no doubt about it. I just don't believe that these particular candidates are the breaking point. I don't think that it's necessarily the case that it's just because it's Trump and Biden, who are two particularly weak candidates, in my opinion, that is the breaking point. I think that they are symptoms of a much larger problem, as we talked about throughout the conversation. They are symptoms of a much larger problem, and that problem is going to persist. Now, it may not appear as dire in 4 years, but the problem will still exist. And it's actually one of the reasons I've warned about Joe Biden. There's some sense in which he will give some people comfort compared to Trump, and then they will think the problem has been resolved when actually nothing's been resolved. Trump is a symptom of our dysfunctional system. And so I think whatever is going on today that's really bad will be going on 4 years from now. And it may get worse. We always think that the current time is the worst time. It may be worse next time. We just don't know. But it's really bad. And I can understand people who think that this is an emergency. I'm not trying to dismiss that. I think that we are maybe close to a breaking point, but I'm not sure we're there.
Well, we have a saying inside the Unity movement. It's always darkest before it goes pitch black. No, that's actually not a saying within the Unity movement. I just made it up. But anyway, yes, it's interesting that we differ over this. I guess there is a question about, you say, it might even get worse. I think it's almost certain to get worse. But there does come a point at which it gets so bad that it doesn't recover. And the question is,
that's right.
One can always say, it's going to the problem will continue to be there, but at some point, you would be right to predict that the stability doesn't exist. And with the number of people, we've had people model the various outcomes of the election, and many of them are inconclusive and seem to result in a strong likelihood of unrest. So we're already at that point. So anyway, I'm sure we're not going to resolve this, but there does come a question as to, people will say, we got a long way to go. It's
yeah, I don't think we have a long way to go. And I'm certainly not, as you can tell from our conversation, one of these people who thinks, oh, this is just like run of the mill. I think that it is getting really, really bad. And even during my time in Congress, I've seen it change. From when I got into Congress, I entered in 2011. From that time to now, I've seen a stark difference. I never would have thought when I got into Congress that John Boehner was an okay Speaker of the House. But now, relative to what I've seen from Ryan and Pelosi, I do think John Boehner was okay, just relative to those two. So, yeah, my perception has changed because things have gotten worse, and we are near that breaking point. And I agree with you that there comes a point where maybe we can't recover. Maybe we just devolve into one of these countries that is totally dysfunctional, where people are just at each other's throats, and they're just trying to amass power, and one group tries to take out the other group. And we don't want to get to that point, but I do worry about that, and I think we are getting close to some dangerous event like that.
All right, Elizabeth, where to next?
All right. So our most popular question among the entire audience and among libertarians with a small L and the libertarian and people who affiliate with the Libertarian Party is the following: could Unity 2020 come on board with the Libertarian candidates? what other options are there to restore liberty, in parentheses, those granted by the Constitution and amendments or the Declaration of Independence, if working together does not occur? So let me say that last one without the parenthetical. What other options are there to restore liberty if working together does not occur?
So is this question for me or for Bret?
It's for both of you.
Okay.
All right. Well, do you want to start off or should I?
Yeah, I can start off. I think that, first of all, it's important to have a good relationship. It's important to maintain partnerships with other people who have a similar mission, even if we don't agree on all things. And even if libertarians and unity movement don't agree on how to exactly conduct this election, I think it's important to maintain good relations and to consider people within sort of this disaffected political world as allies, that we want to change the system and we need to work together against the duopoly. As for what we can do, I think the most important thing people can do is vote for the person you believe in. Don't vote for a person because somebody told you that we have to vote for the Republican or the Democrat. That's the only way. That is how we got to this point. We got to this point because people were coerced into thinking, whether by their family and friends or others, hey, if you vote for the person you believe in, you're throwing away your vote. And I would say that the only vote you're throwing away is if you vote for someone you don't believe in. That's a totally wasted vote. So vote for what you believe in. That's one way to start to change this.
So I would add, the concern I have is that the lethal weapon that the duopoly holds is the argument that if you vote for a third party that is closely aligned with your values, you will empower the major party that is farther from your values. And this lesser evil argument keeps us trapped. And what's more, we now have the phenomenon, well, I guess it's a closely related phenomenon, of the stigma of being held responsible for a great evil. So the fact that both sides are portraying the other as a great evil, and that there is pressure not to vote in this direction lest you be blamed in the end, is weighing heavily on people in an era where stigma is becoming a key manipulative tool. So the reason that the unity movement is constructed the way it is because since it is non-ideological, it can navigate the middle ground and not fall prey to this argument, right? Because it doesn't tend to empower one side or the other. It's very hard to argue that the flaw in it is that it will elect the greater evil. And so my concern about something like the Libertarian Party is that it is one side of the line. And because it is one side of the line, it doesn't have any special power to challenge the lesser evil argument. And so in some sense, it would have to be a partnership in order for it to be viable. It's not that there's any bar to having a libertarian involved in a unity ticket. In fact, you seem like a perfectly viable candidate. You have all of the characteristics that we demanded of our nominees. You're patriotic, you're capable, and you're clearly courageous. So, partnered with the right person from the left side of the political spectrum, that makes a great deal of sense. But I think what doesn't make sense at this moment is the idea that any ideologically driven movement is going to carry the day. I think that's just implausible. And I think we will see that play out in this election as we always do.
Yeah, I think the one thing I'd want to add to that, I don't view the Libertarian Party or libertarianism as along a line. It may be along or it's one point on a triangle or at some place on a circle or something like that. I think it's been to the detriment of the Libertarian Party and libertarianism to be thought of as exclusively some kind of movement on the right. I don't think that's correct. I used to think more like that libertarianism was in some sense more a movement of the right, but in reality, it's neither left nor right. It will share some values with progressives and some values with conservatives, and it has a distinct set of principles. And so I don't know where that comes down in terms of how partnerships work in the future, but I think it's important to clarify that and express that.
Well, okay. So let me say that the reason that I would classify it, and I don't think it's slightly right, but the reason that I classify it that way is that there's a clear bias in libertarianism. In fact, it may be one of the core beliefs is in minimizing government. And I don't mean minimum necessary. I mean a bias against government virtually everywhere. And this bias against solution making is, I think, motivated by something correct, which is a priority on the value of liberty, which I've said many times on our campfires and elsewhere. I think liberty is a very special value, and that this is one of the things the libertarians have absolutely right, is that we should prioritize liberty, because in order to achieve real liberty, you have to solve all of the other problems. And so in some sense, if you manage to deliver people individual liberty, it's because you've solved the other things that would bar them from it. But the I think reflexive sense that solutions tend not to be worthwhile does place it inherently as closer kin to conservatism, because conservatism is about the system as it is rather than progressivism, which is about improving it. Now, I'm not arguing that progressives are right and conservatives are wrong, but it does seem that libertarianism is closer kin to conservatism than progressivism.
Well, first, I would encourage you and others who are listening to check out F.A. Hayek's "Why I Am Not a Conservative," which is an essay he wrote. I think it will address a lot of the points you made. I think the view that libertarianism is primarily about minimizing government is something that, because government, what is government, is a good question, right? Like, you have to ask, what is government? There are different levels of government. There's a federal government and a state government and a city government, and your family is a form of government. So the question is, what is government? And I think the idea that it's just about minimizing government, or centrally about minimizing government, is an idea that's been put out there that creates the wrong impression in people's minds, and libertarians have helped put this idea out there. I think centrally it's about protecting people's rights, and I think that's the best way to think about libertarianism. And we do have views on government, and I would say primarily the view is that as government gets further away from you, it should have less control over your daily life. And this is something that the framers thought was a good idea, and classical liberals, throughout the past few centuries have thought was a good idea, that as government is closer to you, it has more control over your life, and as it's farther away from you, it has less control over your life. So we think there's a place for the federal government, and that's not to say that there's not, and it might be a more minimized place than you might believe in, but we might believe more strongly in local government or in a family government, for example, which are other forms of government. So I think it's important to make that point, that I think it's about protecting people's rights more than it is about minimizing government as some kind of concrete idea, because it all depends on what level of government you're talking about.
Excellent. So I agree with you. And as I said at the top of the discussion, I agree with you that protecting rights is paramount. I take a little bit of a different view about what that means, because I'm interested in realized rights and freedoms as much or more than the abstract ones. But nonetheless, I think we're thematically aligned. But I would say, and I'm curious as to whether this will be familiar to you, some years ago I ran into the concept that I think encapsulates what you were just saying, and to my mind, settles the discussion. It's a concept called subsidiarity. Is that a new one on you, or do you know it?
No, I've heard of that. Yep.
So it comes out of Catholicism, of all places. And what it means is that everything should be governed at the lowest effective level. And the reason I like this is because what it means is that there are actually some things that you want governed above the level of nations, right? If we limit governance to nations, then we've lost the oceans and the atmosphere. And those have to be protected too in order for people's rights to be meaningfully protected. So there are some things that have to be governed at even higher levels. And then there are a great many things you don't want the federal government touching for exactly the reasons you point out. So in any case, maybe we are headed towards a convergence where we can all understand the wisdom of something like subsidiarity and recognize that it is manifesting differently amongst progressives, amongst libertarians, amongst conservatives. And the real question is, can we talk about what the priorities ought to be for the nation and agree that ideally something like subsidiarity is what you're looking for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're on the same page there.
Yeah, that's great. Elizabeth, what's next?
So this next question is for Representative Amash. And just to let the audience know, I'm going to ask this question, and then I'm going to fire off the next round of questions from Democracy AI, and we're going to take just one more question from the audience. So just want to give you a heads up. So Representative Amash, if you could do just one thing without obstacles, what action would you take to fix the problem in government?
So I would open up the House of Representatives. Now, I don't know enough about the Senate process to tell you what they need to do over there, but I can tell you what can happen on the House side. And if you opened up the House of Representatives so that it is, again, a deliberative body where outcomes are discovered, I think it would correct so many problems in government. So many, not just a few. It is at the heart of so many of our problems and so much of the dysfunction. Even things like executive overreach, the power the executive branch has, is in large part due to the fact that Congress is very closed down and very top down, so that only a few people make all the decisions. When you have a few people making all the decisions, for example, Nancy Pelosi in the House and maybe a couple people around her, what ends up happening is they then go and negotiate with the president on things rather than dealing with Congress. And when the president is negotiating with them, he knows he only has to deal with Nancy Pelosi. He doesn't have to deal with anyone else. He can ignore Justin Amash. He can ignore AOC. He can ignore Bernie Sanders. He can ignore anyone in Congress who is sidelined by the leadership. He can basically ignore. He only has to negotiate with Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell right now. And as a result, he has a lot of leverage in the process. He can tell them, I won't sign this bill unless you do X, Y, or Z. And if you had an open process, they'd have to say to the president, well, if you want that thing, I can take your idea back to the entire House of Representatives and I can present it to everyone and we'll have a vote on it and whatever happens, happens. So, and then the president would have less control. So what I'm saying is, opening up the process, allowing people to amend legislation freely, which, by the way, I want to mention here, we have not been able to openly amend legislation in the House of Representatives since 2016. May 2016 was the last time, which happened under Paul Ryan and has continued under Nancy Pelosi, was the last time we were able to come to the House floor and offer an amendment. Currently, under the current system, you have to take your amendments to the Rules Committee, and then they have to be approved by the Speaker before you will get a chance to vote on these things. Now, this may not seem that unusual to people at home, but this is not the way the House of Representatives has worked throughout history. Throughout history, particularly on appropriations legislation, any member of Congress could offer an amendment and have it voted on the House floor. That's how you get a deliberative process. But that deliberative process has been taken away. And now we have to either beg the Speaker for a vote on it, or in many cases now they're just called closed rules where you don't have any amendments whatsoever. Even the Speaker doesn't even listen to your petition. And you can imagine the times that she does listen to your petition and says, okay, we'll consider it. The only ones she's ever going to consider are amendments that don't do anything, or amendments that do something, but which she knows have no chance of passing. In other words, they're so out of the mainstream that they have no chance of becoming law, so she'll let those go on the floor. So if you have a good idea and it has a chance of passing, she'll nix the amendment. This problem where the House of Representatives is not open, does not work as a deliberative body, is the number one problem that I would like to fix if I could just magically take control for a day.
That is outrageous. That is absolutely outrageous that they don't allow amendments. This is turning these bodies into a rubber stamp for whatever process it is that the speaker is involved in. That's shocking.
That's right. Yep.
Wow. All right. Well, I can't believe I didn't know that change had occurred, that, it happened and somehow the theater looks the same, but that's a tremendous difference.
It started under Paul Ryan, and he told us that the reason that Republicans had to do it was to keep Democrats from offering poison pill amendments. He was like, oh, the Democrats keep offering these tough amendments, and we'll have to take this tough vote. So don't worry. Just bring your amendments to the Rules Committee, and I'll approve the ones we'll approve a lot of them, and I'll approve the ones that are good, and we'll discount the ones that are bad. And of course, it's been turned into a weapon against basically all amendments from all sides. So it's not just Nancy Pelosi striking down Republican amendments. She's stopping Democratic amendments from going through that are important. So, and some amendments do go through, but as I said, those amendments are the ones that usually do nothing, or they are so unimportant, or she doesn't care if they're added, or they do something, but they have no chance of passing.
I'm beginning to wonder if maybe the duopoly is not our friend.
Yeah, it's definitely not our friend.
All right, Elizabeth, what do we have?
Okay, so this is our last question, and Representative Amash, we've had so many come in for you, and this was one of our most popular this round.
Okay.
What advice do you give Unity 2020 to proceed? What steps should we take now? Who should we be talking to? And this is a really interesting qualifier. For this question, pretend you are with us and that we are not waiting.
So this is very challenging because I'm a person who likes to engage in some humility when it comes to other people's projects. You know the project a lot better than I do. And to suggest to you the path forward is in a sense overstepping my area of expertise. I know a lot about Congress. I know a lot about the House, and I know about the dysfunction there and how we can address it. And I know the kinds of things I might do as a representative or as just a human being to try to address the problem. But it's hard for me to tell you how to proceed. I think maybe the best way forward is just to keep fighting for what you believe in. You're going to face obstacles. You will have people like me telling you maybe don't do it, or it's a bad idea this time around, or it's maybe next time is a better way to handle it. I think you just take that in stride. You think about what we said, and you proceed in the best course. And sometimes I think the best thing to do is just to keep pushing forward and not worry about whether it's going to be totally successful or not successful, because every movement starts with something small. Like anytime something has become a big thing, it started small. And maybe the first time you went for it, it didn't work out exactly as you had planned, but you built the foundation for something much bigger in the future. So I think it's important just to keep pushing forward and doing what you believe in, regardless of what I tell you or the Libertarian Party tells you or the Green Party or anyone else. I think you have to do what you believe in.
Marvelous. That's excellent advice. And I feel like, this is still a very young process for us, but we have, we started from literally nothing, just an idea, and we've built a movement full of really dynamic, interesting, patriotic people. and we've accomplished quite a number of things I didn't think would be possible already. So yes, there is something to be said for simply pushing forward and discovering what is possible, and you might be surprised. So thank you for that advice. All right, so do I understand then, Elizabeth, we have reached the end of this campfire?
I believe we have, Bret.
All right, excellent. Well, I want to thank you again, Representative Amash, for joining us. It has been an absolute delight and an honor to host you here, and I really do feel that, as has been the case with so many patriots that we've met as we've built this movement, you are a true fellow traveler. Even if we don't agree on the details of everything, we certainly agree that the nation needs patriots to step up and challenge the forces that threaten it. So good luck to you, and I hope we talk to you again in the future.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really did have a great time, and I hope we'll continue to work together and be successful in the future. So thanks.
Excellent. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next campfire. In the meantime, be well. Oh, Elizabeth, do you have an announcement?
Yes, we have Campfire S'mores. So please go to campfiresmores.articlesofunity.org. I forgot to tell you that, Bret. So that's my bad. But I'm glad that we got it. And that, once again, that's campfiresmores.articlesofunity.org to hang out with your fellow patriots after the show.
Terrific. All right. Be well, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.